the idea that Russia would be afraid of Ukraine joining NATO, because it seems like
I think Russia is afraid of Ukraine joining NATO.
Mearsheimer's point, then it just seems obvious that,
But I wouldn't
like,
grant Mearsheimer's point because I think his analysis of Cold War, post-Cold War Europe is fucking trash. And I think his analysis of NATO, like, I don't think NATO expansionism, that was the whole central point of our argument. I don't think NATO expansionism was causing Russian aggression.
it's pretty good.
Okay, hold on. Now I'm going to push harder. Fuck you. I
Okay.
guarantee you that you've...
Well.
All right, what's up?
I don't know. I just like woke up like 10 minutes ago, kind of shaking the cobwebs out. We were, I guess, having a dispute about Ukraine and Mearsheimer.
Yeah, I don't think any of Mearsheimer, anything he's written on this, everything is so stupid. I think he's really dumb. Apparently, in some IR communities, he's really well regarded, but I think a lot of people push back on a lot of his analysis of the general security situation in Europe from the 90s and onward.
You know, just because he's Jewish doesn't mean you can't listen to what he says, right, Devs? Right.
Good one.
No, I mean, okay, so I mean, I'm open to Mearsheimer just being completely wrong. I mean, I read his paper a few days ago. I read some responses. I guess I didn't seek out probably enough. But I mean, what do you think he's like getting wrong in some like major sense?
The idea that Russia is responding to NATO expansion rather than just Russia is trying to, I think, like rebuild the former empire or bring as much under its influence as possible. I think that's like my principal disagreement with him and the examples and comparisons that he uses in that paper. So for instance, he says like, well, how would we feel if Canada or Mexico were to join like a Chinese military alliance? I think that the comparison is not apt at all because the United States is not constantly trying to invade, take over, and assimilate into the United States countries like Canada or Mexico, whereas Russia has a history. So the Soviet Union and Russia have a history of trying to do exactly that to countries that are neighboring them. And I mean, Cuba was part of the, there was an economic group, I don't remember what it's called. The Soviet Union and other countries were part of this huge economic group that Cuba joined in, I think 71, with the Soviet Union. They were part of that. We were fine with that. The only problem that we had, and Russia, by the way, sent military and economic assistance to Cuba. And Cuba is isn't Cuba like 50 miles off the shore of Key West of Florida? We were okay with that until the Soviet Union wanted to ship nuclear fucking warheads and ballistic missiles and shit to Cuba. That was the only time we had an issue with it. So...
Yeah, so I think that with respect to the role of NATO expansion in Russia's attack on Ukraine, I think that there's two things that seem to be playing a role, at least that seem to plausibly be playing a role. One of them being the response to NATO expansion, and the other one just being the fact that Ukraine seems to be a highly resource-rich country with that would be a highly annoying economic competitor to Russia, whose economy is basically like one-dimensionally built around oil. And I think both of those things are probably playing a role. I just don't know why we would I guess, at the outset, rule out the idea that Russia would be afraid of Ukraine joining NATO, because it seems like
I think Russia is afraid of Ukraine joining NATO, but I think the framing is highly dishonest. Russia is afraid of Ukraine joining NATO because if NATO decides to become more Western friendly and is a thriving, happy, and healthy democracy right there, I think that's a threat to the autocratic rule of Putin, and it's a threat to his ability to influence regimes that are surrounding his country. That's why the NATO expansion is a threat. But what gets parroted in the West all the time are these absolute bogus claims that Putin makes that he doesn't want NATO there because he doesn't want to get invaded from there. He doesn't want NATO aggression on his borders. That's bullshit. The Baltics up in the north North have been part of NATO for years, and we didn't put any troops there until he invaded Crimea in 2014. So he's okay having even former Soviet states being part of NATO on his actual borders, but he didn't have any influence in those states when they joined. So I just don't buy this idea that he's suddenly threatened. Oh my God, NATO expansion. He's already got NATO countries on his border. When we've already got nuclear arms in Turkey. I just think he's super ass mad that Ukraine is looking more and more to the West, and they're starting to favor those deals more than what Russia can offer it. And he doesn't want to lose his ability to invade, destroy, and fuck over whatever government he doesn't see as like a Putin loyalist regime.
Yeah, I think that so I think that there's probably like I think that you're probably partly right. Because
Wait,
I think
which
that,
part am I not right on? Tell me.
well, I don't know if so. If, okay, so I think that I I don't. I think that the part that I disagree about is the idea that. So okay, so I agree that it's probably not exclusively he's afraid of getting invaded, right? I think that there's probably a cluster of reasons why he wouldn't want
Okay,
Ukraine.
can we just completely kick that out? No, a NATO country is not going to invade the Soviet
Yeah,
Union.
yeah,
So it's
I
not. So it's not that he's not feeling that at all. That's we can
yeah.
axe that completely. Okay, so go.
I
What's the
think
next?
the more reasonable worry wouldn't be that we're just gonna unprovoked invade Russia through Ukraine. I think the worry would be more so like if in the future a war broke out, Ukraine is like having troops in Ukraine, NATO troops in Ukraine would be a big strategic
Wait,
disadvantage.
a war between who? Between Russia
Uh,
wanting to invade Ukraine, or what?
no, but like a war involving NATO and Russia.
But that's not going to happen. It can't
Um,
happen. That's like a doomsday scenario. Like Russia and NATO can't go to war with each other.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that NATO and Russia will go to war, but I think the point that Mearsheimer makes in his paper is that Ukraine is basically. I'm basically like I don't know how to assess the merits of this argument because I don't really know much about geography or history. But Mearsheimer makes the argument that Ukraine is just essentially a large piece of flat land bordering Russia that's been crossed repeatedly throughout history to strike at
I
Russia
agree.
itself.
That history does exist. I think the Soviet Union the past 20 years has been invaded like 7 times through the Ukrainian lands. I agree with that. But if anything, and this was part of the arguments given in the 90s to Gorbachev about like, well, Germany could unify. Germany could be part of NATO, or they could be independent on their own. But a German that's part of NATO is never going to be a security threat to the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact because nuclear arms aren't going to cross each other. But an independent Germany, maybe, who knows? That's a different story there, right? So a Ukraine that's part of NATO is not a Ukraine that is invading the Soviet Union. They can't, I should say Russia, right? Because as long as Ukraine is part of NATO, NATO cannot cross swords with Russia. So I don't agree with that analysis either. That because of the history of Ukraine, the history of Ukrainian invasions into the Soviet lands don't involve nuclear weapons. We're in a totally different state of security right now in all of Eastern Europe and in all of the world post nuclear weapons being in existence.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to I guess like uh, figure out to what extent like I mean I think probably if NATO and Russia went to war, the nukes would start flying pretty quickly, um, especially given the fact that Russia is like the only like major nuclear power with no ban against like nuclear first strikes. Um, but I don't know whether or not there's some speculation on Putin's part that maybe he wouldn't want to jump to nukes immediately and would still favor a ground war in which Ukraine is an ally of his. I don't know. Um,
I just don't see that. I don't. There's no historical context for that, and I just can't imagine in the future. Like, actually, I'll correct myself. There is some historical context for that. Recent history, Biden himself laid out very specific guidelines before anything happened in terms of the recent Ukrainian invasion. That NATO troops, U.S. troops, there was no fly zone. None of that was going to happen. So I think that we have precedents that like NATO does not seek to like fight Russia directly. I don't think we can plan on that or expect that to happen in the future. And furthermore, I don't think it's fair to restrict the autonomy of sovereign states around the world and their ability to join Western alliances just because of a hypothetical security threat from autocratic lunatic like Putin. I don't think that's fair to say to Ukraine, like, maybe you guys could join me in it, but unfortunately, like, we're just not going to let you because the absolute fucking lunatic to your east might be a little bit uncomfortable because of that. I don't think that's a valid or legitimate reason to exclude them from the alliance.
But isn't that why we excluded them from the alliance?
Historically, because we're a little bit afraid. But we put them and Georgia on a path. They had the
stupid fucking meme.
they were on the membership ascension plan or the membership acceptance plan. They were on a path towards it. But yeah, I mean, we are worried about antagonizing Russia, of course. But still, I mean, like, I don't think that should be a good argument for just excluding sovereign states out of alliances because maybe Russia wants to, fucking destroy you in the future. So it's not fair that we keep Russia from being allowed to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it probably is unfair. But I mean, I think that the worry of like causing a nuclear war is a pretty legitimate one.
Yeah, but don't you think there's a legitimate worry of sovereign states getting perpetually fucked with by Russia and regime changes installed? Don't you think they have legitimate worries as well? Like,
I think they do. But I think that I generally take the view that the reduction of like existential risk takes priority
because I'm putting
over like the
100%.
interests of individual countries and their autonomy.
that's a really big like philosophical like burden that you're placing on the entire like you're basically telling every citizen of particular countries like you guys might get fucked, but like it's necessary for the security of the world. Isn't that a little bit insane?
Well, I wouldn't go to Ukraine and tell them that.
Okay.
Yeah. But so I think that that you're right, that there's probably a variety. But then don't you think that because so I think that Putin might be worried about Ukraine joining or becoming increasingly westernized for some of the reasons that you described. Like he doesn't want a highly resource rich, highly industry rich potential economic partner becoming increasingly like removed from his sphere of influence. So that's one potential reason. Maybe he's worried about us using Ukraine as some sort of like launching off point to, conduct some like operations to destabilize public support for Putin or something.
No,
in the Russian.
I reject that part completely. I won't even entertain that we're launching special forces or operations. This is what Putin does, but I don't think the United States or NATO is going to do this into Russia. Absolutely not.
You don't think so?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Maybe not. I'm not sure.
This would be like NATO related forces or US related forces like conducting like special operations in Russia would be insane. Like I'm sure there's like some like ultra, Call of Duty Black Ops fucking spying shit going on or whatever. I'm sure that's happening. But like full on like armies and shit being positioned in areas and like troop excursions and stuff into Russian borders or contested territory, I don't think so, no.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if NATO would be likely to, like with Ukraine, be able to conduct anything that would. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be like whole armies swooping in, but I'm not sure if Putin thinks there's some possibility of like some sort of highly specialized, like Black Ops style operations happening using Ukraine as like launching off point into Russia or something. And then also, I think you might just be worried about his reputation on the world stage, right? Like, it's humiliating if his former, historical allies continually keep getting, swept up and westernized. And
that's
true,
but can't we? What does that say about Russia? Because Ukraine and Russia, as like the most powerful Soviet state, like the state that inherited I think 2/3 of their fucking nuclear arms when the Soviet Union fell apart. What does it say if that country, a country that you've also have a history of trying to brutally fucking Russify, that has a lot of ethnic Russians living in the east, if that country is looking more to the west than to the east, what does it say about you as a Russian country? Like, I mean, like, I feel like at some point you have to stop pitying or treating Putin, you know, like a sick dog. Like, oh, we're so sorry that, like, it seems like nobody wants to be your friend and everybody is fucking petrified of you. And, like, I don't know. That just seems crazy to me. Like, I think it's worth talking to, like, Polish people, Hungarians, Romanians, like, oh, how do you guys feel about a NATO? Like, would you be happy if you were on your own and you were, you know, bordering Russia? You were like, how would you guys feel about it? Like, I think everybody would look like they look at Western people like crazy. Like, yeah, we're happy in NATO. Yeah, fuck no, I don't want fucking Russia to be next to me and me be a non-aligned country. Like, I think that says more about Russia than it does about NATO expansionism. That countries seem very eager to look more to the West and the East for the future of their people.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't like. I mean, fuck Putin. I don't like. I hate Putin much more than I dislike, say, like the U.S. government or NATO. But and like, so the point isn't that I want to like pity Putin or say like, you know, like I'm not trying to place like some moral blame on the West and say that like we're more morally condemnable for
sure
committing.
And you might not be, but that's when people talk about NATO expansionism, that's what it sounds like. They make NATO sound like highly antagonistic towards Russian security interests, which I don't think is fair, given that Russia seems to be so aggressively positioned at its borders in so many different conflicts.
Yeah. What do you think about, because I don't think it necessarily has to be this dichotomy between either we, you know, we let Ukraine into NATO and we keep antagonizing Russia, though their claims of, you know, being antagonized by these actions are illegitimate. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that, or we like just let Ukraine get fucked by Russia. So like, what do you think about like Mearsheimer's set of proposals, for example, where we basically just attempt to ensure that Ukraine has the status of like Austria during like the Cold War, where
nothing short of, the thing is that I think that NATO expansion and NATO and the ascension to NATO, that's like a binary condition. I don't know if there is a set of guarantees that we can give them short of them being in NATO, right? Because at this point, the whole world is on Ukraine's side. Like, there would be tremendous popular support. If we got rid of all nuclear weapons, U.S. boots would be on the ground, probably, right? We have a history of for stuff like this. If we thought that like Russia was going in and doing unfair and fucked up shit, blah, blah, we would be on the ground. But nuclear weapons change everything. So I don't know what type of proposal or set of policies or whatever guarantees the safety of Ukraine, short them being in NATO. I haven't seen any that. There's literally, I mean, like, we have the diplomatic treaty, the Budapest Memorandum, that basically says we got Ukraine to give up their entire nuclear arsenal, to disable all the bombers, to ship everything out. They got rid of all of their shit in agreement for not being invaded or fucked with by other countries. Oops. So that meant nothing.
So I think I think Mearsheimer's position is that basically one of Putin's main motivations, and it seems like we don't necessarily disagree like very harshly on this, because it seems like we both seem to agree that there were certain components, and it's, you know, morally illegitimate for Putin to lash out in virtue of this, but there are certain things that have happened, like Ukraine, which is a highly valuable economic partner, might be strategic in other senses, might say something about Putin's status on the global stage and his reputation as a world leader. And as a result of those things, Ukraine over time, and more Russian neighbors in general over time, becoming more westernized, more integrated into NATO and the EU. And another factor he brings up is like America's support of like anti-Russia groups within Ukraine. And that's basically Putin's main motivation for attacking. And if that's the case, then if the United States and its allies were to like publicly rule out NATO's expansion into Georgia and Ukraine, and then we sort of fashioned some sort of economic rescue plan for Ukraine that's like funded jointly by like the EU, Russia, and the United States, and we limited our social engineering, as Mearsheimer called it, efforts inside of Ukraine, and basically made a deal that we would just allow Ukraine to remain neutral, then it would just seem like Putin wouldn't have much of an incentive to like invade Ukraine.
If we did all of that and agreed to all of that, do you think Putin would give Crimea back to Ukraine?
I'm not sure.
The answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right. He would never give that piece of land back. Because all of the justifications that he used prior to invading Crimea, that they all see themselves as Russian anyway. The bullshit referendum they held after they invaded the country and reported 95% voter turnout, like, oh, they want to join, like all that shit, like they're never giving it back. There's access to the Black Sea, like they would never do that. So I don't see a way forward. It just seems so weird to be bullied by a thug so hard that it's like, okay, well, we have to say they can't do this because if we do, it's going to make Mr. Putin really upset and he's going to start funding civil wars to the east and taking over pieces of land to the south, and then now we're doing a full invasion, so we need to back up. Like, that just seems like insane to me. But
so I think at the end of the day, Putin is basically, I mean, Russia, and I think Mearsheimer made this point in his paper, I mean, Russia is basically a declining power. They have an aging population.
No, I reject anybody that, fuck, I might be an asshole for this. There's another guy on YouTube, or that's well known for giving takes like this. I don't remember his name. I think his last name is Z. Anytime somebody brings out some analysis like, oh, well, the population is aging and, it's an autarky, like, I don't think this is going to last. Like, bullshit. Like, dude, the future is who knows what's going to happen. Oh, the Zihan guy does this. I would never have such a one-dimensional analysis of the future that, like, well, since they have an aging, like, who knows how situations will change around the world, right? Nobody would have known 3 years ago about the coronavirus, and arguably this is reshaping a lot of different parts of the world and the world economy. So the idea that you can just completely guess, like, well, because Russia has an aging population, I can go ahead and make all of these statements about the future political scenarios across all of Eastern Europe. I just think that's silly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the aging population is like a decisive consideration. I mean, maybe more important would just be the fact that, absent the rest of the world deciding to, and I think Noah Smith wrote an article about this, where he was proposing his sort of version of an off-ramp for Russia. But absent like the rest of the world agreeing to create some sort of Marshall Plan for Russia and invest heavily in their economy, I mean, Russia's economy is basically just a massive gas station, right?
Yeah, sure, I understand.
The world is, going to be moving away from that. And so... I don't know. I mean, I don't feel that like compelled, like we need to contain Putin, like he's like on the rise. And
but it seems like but the problem is when he starts moving into other countries, and even him moving into those other countries seems contrary to his own security interests. The thing that I just generally push back on is this idea of like NATO expansionism is the reason. That's just the big thing that I've heard so many times. I don't know if he was the prime minister or the president, Yatsenyuk, I think, from the Ukrainian. I want to say he was the prime minister, but I don't think it was. But Ukraine had no intention of joining NATO until the Crimean invasion happened. Like, they were looking at EU trade deals. They were looking at like Western economic integration. But I'm pretty sure he explicitly said that joining NATO was off the table, and that opinion didn't change until Crimea was invaded. And now you've got Finland and Sweden are seriously considering joining NATO. So, I mean, it seems like if NATO expansion was a security concern, Russia's doing everything to the opposite of alleviating those concerns. Like, I hear that so much. That was the big thing that I pushed back on. That Mearsheimer dipshit is like one of the biggest, most cited proponents of trash fucking interpretation of Russian actions, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I think Mearsheimer makes the point that, so with respect to the invasion of Crimea, I think Mearsheimer makes the argument that basically it didn't seem to be the case that Russia had any real intention, or at least there was no indication of an intention on the part of Russia to invade Ukraine until after February of 2014, when basically the Ukrainian people overthrew their corrupt pro-Russian president and replaced him with a more pro-Western one.
Yeah, but I said, even that guy said there was no intention of joining NATO. That was public statements he made, was that they weren't looking to join NATO. But just the idea that you now have a new president that's not a loyalist to your country, essentially, I don't think that's a valid reason to now start invading and annexing parts of another country and then funding separatist groups to cause civil war in the East. Like,
yeah.
You can be pro-West without necessarily being like anti-Putin. I don't know. It all seems like so clear-cut, like horrible from the Russian side, but I feel like people are so eager to make excuses for him for...
No, I agree. It's clear-cut horrible from the Russian side, no matter how... I mean, like, even my story that, you know, that I'm telling about the situation is just like, Russia is basically like an autocratic, brutal, imperialist, oligarchical dictatorship that's invading a smaller, resource-rich democratic country because, you know, it's the way that country democratically decided to determine their own future was not in alignment with Russia's strategic interests.
Yeah, but so the problem is that, like, I understand that we can tell the story in different ways, but what you just said, I think, is pretty accurate. I don't think that's, like, the highly biased other side version of the story. I think that's actually what's happening. I think that's just, like, de facto. Like, without much bias, I think that Putin is highly threatened by a successful democratic regime that's on his borders because it threatens his own rule. Mm-hmm. And I think he wants to be able to exercise more influence over that country, either indirectly through some sort of stooge or puppet in office, or directly through actually taking over the territory. I think that's actually what's happening.
Yeah, no, I agree with the assessment that I gave a minute ago that he's basically invading a smaller democratic country for strategic interests. But I think that's compatible. Like, I think part of the reason it's in his strategic interests is because he sees this highly valuable, strategically important neighbor country becoming increasingly westernized. And I don't think that makes it morally legitimate. But I think that maybe informs what we should do about it, right? Because at the end of the day, like, yeah, it matters to me, like, what the Ukrainian people want. But I think, like, at the end of the day, if we were able to ensure some sort of prosperous and neutral Ukraine that's not going to get invaded by Russia, but that, you know, isn't going to join NATO and is going to, you know, have some economic rescue plan funded by Europe and
okay,
the
hold
US.
on, wait. I can't just walk back to these points that are indefensible. That's never going to happen, right? You yourself admitted there is no future for Ukraine not being NATO aligned where they get Crimea back, where Russia pulls all of its troops from the east, right? How could Putin, who's told his people for years now that there's a genocide in Donbass, 15,000 innocent civilians murdered by the neo-Nazi Azov battalion of the fascist Ukrainian Empire, how can Putin then say, okay, well, we're going to pull everything from the east because Ukraine decided to be independent? Like, do you really think that's going to happen? That he's going to stop funding separatism there? That Crimea is, like, none of this is going to happen. That's not realistic.
Do you think that the Ukrainian people wouldn't accept a deal that doesn't include them getting Crimea back?
I mean, Crimea is what put Ukraine, like, in the civil war status in the East, and it's what's put them on a path towards now desperately wanting to join NATO. I at this point, like, Ukraine might be so, like, raped and pillaged and fucked that they would be cucked into accepting an agreement where they just lose Crimea and they're like, fuck it, which I think is really sad. But I don't know if they would accept that and say that, like, oh, well, we assure you that in the future, you know, Russia's not going to invade you, because Russia's already violated agreements about that. So why would they ever accept a deal where they don't even get their shit back? And now they've got to accept in the future that they can't have any NATO security assurances either.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the past agreements that Russia broke, I mean, to be fair, those were just agreements between, like the nuclear arms thing, where Ukraine agreed to give up their nuclear arms. As far as I understand, I don't know that much about it, but weren't those just agreements, like, between Ukraine and Russia exclusively? Because I feel like it would feel like...
Absolutely not. So that agreement, the Budapest Memorandum, was between the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, those three countries, and then Germany and France, I think, later signed on. And then the three impacted countries it was Belarus, Ukraine, and one other country that I always fucking forget. But it was three other countries that had nuclear weapons. And what they basically said was, we're going to give up all of our nuclear arms. Oh, in Kazakhstan. We're going to give up all of our nuclear arms so that we can join the nuclear non-proliferation status. But But if we give up our nuclear weapons, you guys have to promise not to fucking invade us. Because the only thing that keeps you guys from invading us is the fact that we have nukes. So we'll give up our nukes and we'll become non-nuclear countries, but you guys all have to promise not to fuck with us. So that's why all the major nuclear powers signed on. It's like, okay, fine, we agree. And then they gave up their nuclear arms, and wow. So what does that say to like non-aligned countries in the future? Like, what is the message you're sending them? Like, better get nukes, because if not, NATO's not going to help you and Russia's going to butt fuck you. Like, that just seems to be like the only option.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that this sort of precedent of not coming to Ukraine's aid probably will incentivize more nuclear proliferation from smaller states. I mean, we've already kind of seen states that have been more neutral and more pacifistic considering revamping their militaries and joining military alliances.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I guess at the end of the day, like, if Mearsheimer is correct in his analysis, then it just seems like Russia's main, like, if Mearsheimer is correct that Russia's main incentive to invade Ukraine comes from the fact that he's worried about this strategically important neighbor country becoming increasingly westernized, then, like, if we were to, which we have never done before, in past agreements, like the agreement you were mentioning, if we were to explicitly state, like, okay, we're all going to agree on this, so long as Ukraine remains neutral and prosperous and doesn't get invaded, we're going to rule out them joining NATO, and we're going to stop our funding of anti-Russian groups within Ukraine, or like political parties within Ukraine. I think that our agreeing to stop doing those things that Russia's worried about would probably provide enough incentive for Russia not to, like, straight up invade Ukraine, right?
No, I don't think so. I know. Why wouldn't they? What?
Because they don't want, well, because I guess if we grant, like, Mearsheimer's point, then it just seems obvious that.
But I wouldn't grant Mearsheimer's point, because I think his analysis of Cold War, post-Cold War Europe is fucking trash. And I think his analysis of NATO, like, I don't think NATO expansionism, that was the whole central point of our argument. I don't think NATO expansionism is causing Russian aggression. I think that Russian aggression is what's leading to more NATO expansionism. It's what's put Ukraine on such a dire path towards NATO membership, although that's never going to happen now. It's why the Baltics joined NATO. It's why other countries in Eastern Europe joined NATO. I think it's the other way around. I don't think that it's just fair to say, like, Russia has security concerns, therefore they're trying to shore up their borders. I think that Russia is an autocratic empire that's seeking to expand its influence in whatever way it can, and that's what they're going to do, regardless of whether NATO is there or not.
Yeah. So, okay, I guess, so one point that I would ask about is, well, so firstly, I mean, it seems like, so with respect to the role of, like, to account, like, if we're imagining a counterfactual world where NATO didn't start to increasingly move towards Russia's backyard, or whatever we want to say, and neighboring countries that are on Russia's border didn't keep getting increasingly westernized. So in that counterfactual world, right, would it be likely that Russia ends up, like, straight up invading Ukraine?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, 1,000,000%. I never engage in historical counterfactuals, but if that were to happen, absolutely. With Vladimir Putin as the leader, maybe not with I always forget the fucking names. The guy after Gorbachev, is it Yeltsin, I'm sorry. Maybe not with him, maybe not with Gorbachev, but with Putin, yes, absolutely. I think that he would immediately set his eyes on all of the neighboring ex-Soviet Union states, and I think he would begin to move in. Absolutely.
Well, so I don't know what your beef is.
Wait, or say that. What, sorry, say that again.
Oh, I don't know what your beef is with possible worlds, but I mean, I guess, like, so is your idea that you think Russia would, like, annex Ukraine?
Not Russia specifically, Putin, him. I think that Putin views the destruction of the Soviet Union, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact as, like, the worst event in his entire life. And I think that he desperately seeks to rebuild that influence and the empire of Russia in the past. And if those countries bordering him weren't part of NATO, I think that Russia would be highly active in trying to actively influence those regimes towards change through subversive measures like sending military supplies or supporting separatist groups or quote-unquote recognizing independent states within areas and then sending in peacekeeping operations, or overtly through just war and invasion. I think he would absolutely be doing that, for sure.
I don't know. I don't think that Russia could annex Ukraine.
Wait, why not?
I don't think that their economy is in a good place to be able to create like a sustained occupation. Or
they don't need a sustained occupation. They have 4x the fucking military size, 5x the military size. Like, they're renowned for they have a fuck ton of artillery. They've got a huge air force. Like, they can take Ukraine. Do you think that they're not going to take Ukraine right now? Do you think Ukraine will resist?
Oh, no, I absolutely think they're going to take Ukraine.
Wait, so why wouldn't they be able to in a counterfactual world?
Well, because I think that, what they're trying to do right now is, I think, just beat Ukraine into submission so that Ukraine makes some major concessions. But I don't think
but those concessions are going to be on board with... This is how the Baltics were taken by the Soviet Union in the 40s, I think, was basically they rolled in, they invaded, they deposed the entire prior parliament, they installed a new government, and then the new government was like, hey, we unanimously vote to join the Soviet Union. This is going to be awesome. Like, who's to say that something similar wouldn't happen in Ukraine then? That, oh yeah, well, they just want to go in, bully the government, and then install a new leadership, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. Hey, that new leadership really wants to be a lot closer. Yeah, no shit, they want to be closer to Russia. It's a new leadership installed by Putin. Yeah, like, the Soviet Union has a history of this.
Yeah. I mean, if that's what you mean by annex, then yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's implausible. I guess I thought you meant something more like you know, like we're bringing back the USSR. Ukraine is now part of our territory, like explicitly.
Yeah, I think that's what Putin would want to do. Maybe right now it's only a name, but in the future, if he could incorporate these republics into a large union, I think he would absolutely want to do that. Yes, for sure.
Maybe that seems like very, well, it seems like that would be difficult.
Why? How? Well, it's difficult now because of NATO. That's what makes it difficult.
Well, NATO is not in. NATO's not in Ukraine. I mean, we're providing them arms, but it seems like we could do that regardless, right?
But providing arms isn't always enough. And also, we can't provide assistance as NATO. The United States can do stuff, but as NATO, we can't do any kind of direction. That's why we had to beg Germany to stop shipping them fucking helmets and actually send them real shit. But also, there's still, there's even disagreements in countries about what to send. Like, I think Poland, just blocked the transfer of a bunch of jets or something because people, it's like there can be some effort, but there's not like a coordinated NATO effort to save Ukraine right now. It's not the same.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, if the point is just, you know, they're only doing okay because of NATO, NATO's expansion in that direction. I mean, it seems like the individual countries within NATO could send Ukraine arms and probably would, like, regardless of...
Sure, but but arms sent to your country is not the same as, like, troops and actual manpower and the training necessary to utilize that manpower, right? Like, there's probably a lot of... This is a guess on my part, but I'm probably right. There's probably a lot of highly advanced U.S. tech that can be employed in the form of armor, artillery, airstrike, cruise missiles, like other types of tech that Ukraine just can't use. Like, we would send it to them and they wouldn't even know how to apply the technology. So, I mean, having, actual NATO presence there and not just, shipping weapons and money and shit is probably a big deal.
Yeah, but I thought the point was that in this world, relative to the counterfactual world, the only reason Ukraine is doing so well that it would seem implausible for Russia to be able to, completely annex them and sustain that and, bring them under Russian territory is because in this world, Ukraine, in virtue of NATO's expansion, were able to.
Why do you think they wouldn't be able to control? Why do you think they wouldn't be able to control them?
Wouldn't be able to control Russia, not be able to control Ukraine.
Yeah,
I think they might be able to control Ukraine in the sense of bullying them into having governments that don't act out of line with Russian strategic interests.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably...
But that's all Russia needs, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I also think resisting Russia on the ground is a really scary. I don't think, because people are like, oh well, the Ukrainians will resist and blah blah blah. I don't know if that is necessarily the case. Like because there was the conflict with in the second is it Chechenian or Chechnyan civil war, where like Russia will just roll in troops and just like indiscriminately blow the fuck up out of like people or places, and then like move out tons of people as well. Like I think that resisting Russia is a pretty scary thing. It's not the same as like when people resist like the United States and everybody around the world is writing articles about it, and people in the US are like, oh, this is bad and blah 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 blah. When Putin went south into Georgia, I think there were like 5,000 missing Georgians from like forced disappearances. Like he had no problem just shipping off hundreds of thousands of ethnic Georgians to just like leave the lands of the place that he went in and took over, and just indiscriminately like blowing shit up and supporting groups that have been accused of tons of not civil rights abuses, but human rights abuses. Like I think that if he had Ukraine, I think he could probably hold on to it, or at least install a government there that could hold on to it. I don't think that's inconceivable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So I agree with your analysis of the current situation. I mean, I listened to a talk by this guy named Michael Kaufman, who I guess is like a leading expert on the Russian military. Mm-hmm. And his analysis was essentially that, like the invasion hasn't gone that well so far, but like Russia's strategies in the war so far like haven't even followed their typical doctrine. Like they've been holding back immensely.
Yeah,
like
I've listened to the probably similar or the same talks by him. Essentially, they tried to like blitz rush like Kiev, and they were hoping they could get a quick win, but they couldn't. So now they're more slowly rolling out there. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And so like I think like, you know, if anything, what's going to happen? Like, and I think it's dangerous for people, and a lot of people on the left to be sort of like perpetuating this, you know, this like mythology, like, oh yeah, Ukraine's gonna do it. Like, I don't think we should be like indulging that delusion that Ukraine is gonna like win the war, right? Because I think that just like I saw like a recent poll, something like 90% of Ukrainians think that they're actually gonna win the war, and like I think it's dangerous to have expectations that are that unrealistic. If anything. Sure. If the war drags on, it's just going to become more bloody, and then Russia's going to win.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Do you think I'm unhinged then? Because you said I was unhinged on Twitter. I feel like I'm not unhinged. I've been only reading about this shit for like the past fucking week. So, am I unhinged, or are we not unhinged anymore?
I think the comments about Mearsheimer are unhinged.
Which comments?
You called him like a Nazi.
I did not call him a Nazi. I said that he supported the work of a guy that is essentially like a Holocaust revisionist. But I thought it was really weird. It was kind of a throwaway comment, because I think I even said after that, not to I guess personally character sensitive, but I thought it was really weird that he supported that writer Azmov or it's like AZTMOV or whatever the guy's name. I just thought that was incredibly strange. I think I linked that. I might have linked that to you today when I responded on Twitter. If you think that's wrong or whatever, or if you think that guy's not like a Holocaust revisionist / Nazi, you feel free to correct me on that. But I thought all of my comments were correct. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that.
So if you let me know if I'm wrong. It was Gilad Arzman, I believe it was. And if you like statements made by this guy is, I think that 65 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, we must be entitled to start asking the necessary questions. We should ask for some conclusive historical evidence and arguments rather than follow a religious narrative that is sustained by political pressure and laws. We should strip the Holocaust of its Judeo-centric exceptional status and treat it as a historical chapter that belongs to a certain time and place. 65, like I can read, there are so many quotes for this guy. If you think I'm incorrect on any of this, feel free to call me out, but I don't think any of my comments were unhinged. Do you think I said anything else that was unhinged?
Well, I think that. So I think, well, firstly, I guess, like, I agree those comments were weird, like, for sure, like, super weird. But I don't know, I mean, I don't think, were those comments even in the book that Mearsheimer, like, wrote a review of?
I don't know if they were in that particular book, but I know that it's probably worthwhile to be highly critical of works of people that have engaged in that sort of apologia, because you don't know where it might sneak into other types of their work. For instance, the David Irving guy that had his huge libel suit over the Holocaust revisionism stuff, prior to that libel suit, was seen as a relatively, if not disliked scholar, a pretty relatively good historical scholar when it came to World War II stuff. A lot of people started citing his work as saying, wow, I think the Dresden bombings were a lot worse than we thought they were. And, this is a guy that was willing to dig through the archives and do the research and find the sources that nobody was talking about. And it wasn't until his big libel lawsuit where it was revealed that, okay, this guy engages in so much historical revisionism around the Holocaust that people started being more critical of his other stuff as well. Something that historians do that is so deeply concerning to me, and I hate this because normal layman people do this, is, this sounds so stupid to say this, and I hate that I'm saying this, but people don't always check the footnotes on larger historical work. So if you cite a source, not everybody will actually open the source and read all of it to see if it verifies or validates or conforms with what you're saying. And David Irving got away with that for a long time because he'd write these huge works that have 1,000 sources. But when you actually go and you read through the footnotes and you go to the original material that he's sourcing, you're like, this doesn't really support what they're going to be saying. And he got by not doing that for a long time. So I'm just saying that if you have a guy that has all of these weird statements on record or whatever, then I'll be a little bit, maybe the book that he did write is good, maybe it's not. But that still doesn't change my original claim that Mearsheimer is essentially giving positive reviews and props to a dude that is a fucking a Holocaust revisionist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, so the comments from the guy, I mean, does he explicitly say we should not accept the traditional Holocaust narrative, or is he just weird about saying there's a dogma around it or something?
I would have to go back and look. I just know that everything that he had written sounds to me like Nazi propaganda. Now, he might not believe that. Maybe he's just a guy that's really keen for the truth or whatever. But I mean, a lot of these quotes sound like the Holocaust became the new Western religion. Unfortunately, is the most sinister religion known to man. It is a license to kill, to flatten, to nuke, to wipe, to rape, to loot, and to ethnically cleanse. It made vengeance and revenge into a Western value. Comments about how Jewish people were, persecuting Hitler and the Germans and everything, and that Jewish people traffic body parts, right? Fagin is the ultimate plunderer, child exploiter, and usurer. Shylock is the bloodthirsty merchant. With I don't know if it's Fagin or Fagin or how to pronounce it, but Fagin and Shylock in mind, Israeli barbarism and organ trafficking seems to be just other events in an endless, hellish continuum. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe these are just one-off comments. Maybe his book is actually really good, but I don't think anything I said was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems I don't know. I mean, it seems Mearsheimer, I guess, wrote a positive review of this guy's book. But I mean, I read Mearsheimer's review. He didn't say anything this guy's Holocaust commentary was pretty good.
Okay, hold on. Now I'm going to push harder. Fuck you. Okay. I guarantee you that you've probably been on the fucking crowd of people that gets fucking pissed off at me when I hang out with Lauren Southern. Would you ever apply this level of charity to anybody on the alt-right or any of these other far-right people? Would you ever be well, when Lauren said this thing about the guy, she didn't say, I love that guy because he's a Nazi. She didn't actually say that, so she's probably true. Or when Nick Fuentes talks about this, he's only talking about these. He's not actually explicit. Would you ever use that? Because we were on levels of charitability previously thought impossible by modern social analysis. Okay, we are engaging in a lot of charitability here, right? The statement you just uttered, well, he didn't say that he liked the Nazi parts. That seems a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have been known to be charitable. I mean, I talked to Lauren Southern. We had a conversation. It was a nice conversation. I think she's a nice person. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just seems he wrote the review of the book. I'm not even sure if the guy talked about the Holocaust in the book he was reviewing. But I mean, just given the status of Mearsheimer more generally as a highly respected academic in foreign policy, it seems weird to throw in he wrote a review of a guy who in other places made a few really weird comments about the Holocaust being a dogma or something.
Sure. And I mean, he is respected, but I mean, international realism is fought against as well. It's not like everybody says that everything he says is perfect too. I don't know if I linked you a thread or an article, but there are other really well-respected academics that will fight against things that he said as well. And I think I need to do more reading here. This is all stuff I haven't read yet. But I think that the predictions made by other schools of thought in the 90s and onwards in the general European state of security have been more accurately described by people that weren't international realists, that weren't doing this crazy IR binge. And I think that their general explanation of the events, the predictions made in the 90s by those schools of thought were more accurate than the predictions made by the IR school of thought in terms of how things would play out. But
yeah, that's certainly plausible. I haven't looked much into it. I know probably most of the people I know who are into foreign policy tell me that they're realists. So maybe I'm just biased in like the Mearsheimer direction.
Maybe. But I think hasn't it been like a pretty common call by the IR crowd that like I think it's called multipolarity of Europe would cause like horrible fucking wars to break out over the next like 30 years. There'd be constant conflict between the East and West, that all this conflict would break out and break out. Wasn't that generally the broad predictions made by these people? And haven't like the past 30 years of Europe been incredibly fucking peaceful? Like hasn't it been like pretty chill for the most part? That actually having a lot of healthy, strong democratic regimes flourishing in this liberal world does seem to be pretty good for the overall state of security in Europe. I just hate that now that like in 2014 and now in 2022, now that some invasion people are like, oh look, we were right all along. We told you Europe was gonna fucking fall apart. It's like, I don't know about that one, Chief.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Like, it seems like realists by and large are extremely skeptical of like multipolarity as a concept. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's probably plausible. But to be fair to me, okay, I read that thread. I started to read that thread that you posted. And it does start by singing pretty high praises for Mearsheimer, okay, which I think goes to show he's, like, generally speaking. Like, most of his harshest critics, like, in academia would not accuse him of, like, not being able to substantiate anything.
Sure, I agree as much. He is a respected scholar, and that guy does start off saying that. But I think it's because he's so respected, you have to be careful, because if you just start shitting on him, people are like, oh no, he's super respected. But I mean, the guy goes on to say that he completely and totally disagrees with his analysis of Ukraine, and I think with the state of Europe onwards. But
yeah.
I mean, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's all fair. Do you think that so I guess like in conclusion, so you think that Russia would have invaded Ukraine just like regardless of like even absent like Western like even if the West had made an effort to be like let's try to strike some deal to make sure that Ukraine maintains neutral and like we'll rule out them joining NATO in exchange, and we'll all like cooperate to help Ukraine's economy flourish. Like you think like under those,
yes.
If the West that attempt, you think Russia still?
I think that if Ukraine opted for a flourishing democracy that was rejecting like Putin loyalism, yes, I think they would.
Okay. Even if they had like friendly economic relations with Putin.
Well, it depends on what friendly economic relations mean.
Yeah, I guess. Like I guess the sorts of deals, like.
Because the problem with Yanukovych wasn't that he wanted deals with the East, it's that he was rejecting deals with the West. That was what people were so upset about. So if they had like trade deals with Russia or all that, I'm sure they'd probably be okay. But the fact that they were looking more towards the West for integration as well,
Yeah. Do you think like if well, I don't know enough about the substance of those deals to assess whether or not there was like a possibility that they could just have deals with the West and with Russia in the sense that they were crafting them.
Well,
yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not. I guess I'm like somewhat like I'm not super confident either way in the counterfactual that we attempt to do something like that. I'm not confident in whether or not Russia would attack. But, I mean, I think that's enough for me to suggest that feels like the West should have at least tried that strategy to, like, lower the chance of future invasion and future war.
Do you think that, like, so now I'm going to hit you with the classic, because it's not a foreign policy discussion if we don't have a comparison to Hitler, okay? Mm-hmm. Do you not think that you're advocating for appeasement here?
I think that... So, I guess the answer to that is just going to depend on to what extent I buy like Mearsheimer's analysis, because if Mearsheimer is right that one of the main reasons for, because I guess like the problem with Hitler was that Hitler was just going to keep invading like no matter what, because his sole ambition was to just like
Wait. Hold on. Now let's be really careful that we don't use our 2020 hindsight caps. Okay. It's easy for you now to say that Hitler would keep invading no matter what. But imagine you and I, as old men, 30 years from now, are having this conversation, and now Putin has worked his way into every non-aligned state around. Wouldn't I just say to you, well, obviously, giving them Crimea and Eastern Ukraine was silly because we knew he was just going to keep invading and invading and invading, right? This is the problem with appeasement, no?
Yeah, but I think so. I guess that hinges on like whether or not, if we created such deals and ensured neutrality, if Russia would want to invade them. I guess depends on whether Putin, like Hitler, has as his like central concern reuniting like the old empire and
okay. So when Putin is on a record saying multiple times that the worst event of the last century, worse than the Holocaust, was the dissolution of the Soviet Union, why would you not think that that might be an effort of his? What? I don't understand why you wouldn't think that might be a desire of his.
We'll see. Now we've both cited people who endorse weird positions about the Holocaust.
Okay. I love you. No. I'm not unhinged.
No, I mean, I think, so I think that, like, Putin definitely has said a lot of that shit, and he has said, like, we want to bring back the Soviet Empire. And I think that might be a desire of his. But I would also be careful, like, because, I mean, to what extent would, taking this path lead us to being like, well, of course George Bush invaded Iraq for freedom. He said it in the speech, right? Like, I think to some extent a lot of this rhetoric is just trying to appeal to, like hardliners in the Russian population to gain political support for the wars. But generally, when I'm trying to assess like what I think his intentions are, I generally default to like, okay, well, what does it like make strategic sense for his intentions to be? And
but even comparing the Bush thing, as embarrassing as it is, I think you could argue that there was a naive desire there for the United States to install a peace. Because to be fair, I don't know if Rage Pub was going to soy out, or I don't remember what his position was. Saddam Hussein shouldn't have been there, okay? That guy was a fucking lunatic. And after the first Gulf War, that dude should have been kicked the fuck out. But for U.S. interest security reasons, we kept him there. I don't think it's crazy to say that the United States saw ourselves as being able to go into Iraq and install a flourishing democratic regime. We were naive about it and stupid about it. But I don't think that's the same thing that Putin's doing. And also, at least in the United States and in Western countries, people were highly critical of that, right? You can say, in the US, you can be a journalist and say, yeah, I think fuck Bush, fuck the country, fuck the US. We're just, raping and pillaging the lands of Iraq. That's bullshit. And you're not going to wake up tomorrow with fucking plutonium poisoning, okay? Or disappeared into some fucking jail in Siberia, because you decided to speak out against the government. And other allies of ours were speaking out as well, right? France was upset with everything. They didn't want us to go to war at all. That's why we fucking hated them after it. It was hard to galvanize support among a lot of our allies for the extended stay in Iraq, at least. I don't like the comparison of U.S. foreign policy to Russia foreign policy. I agree that we've made mistakes, but this equivocating everything to being the same, that's not really equivocating. The equalizing of everything as being like the same, and the U.S. is just as bad as Russia, and blah 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 blah. I don't think that's not accurate. I don't think that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to say that the U.S. is as bad as Russia. I think that Russia is much worse than the U.S. But I think that so I mean, my point is just that like in the same vein that like so maybe there was some naive desire on the part of some American politicians to like install democracy in the Middle East, but I think that by and large, I don't think those were like the main incentives. I think the main incentives, I don't have like a strong position on whether it was like, whether we just want to go the Noam Chomsky route and say it's all oil. I don't know if that's plausible. Or whether we want to say there was some other like military strategic interests that we had in invading Iraq. But I think that generally speaking, when an invasion happens, and then, the country who did the invasion says like, oh, well, we were doing it for this, idealistic sort of ideological reason, I generally make the assumption that the
Well, sure.
idealistic
We look at the actions afterwards, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the actions of Putin are pretty pointing to one direction. I don't think there's any confusion there, right? But I don't know how formal the agreement is, but like Belarus and Russia have already made like some, I don't know if it's a formalized state union thing or whatever. I think that Putin would very much like to see a new Ukraine brought into it. I don't know if they'll get to that point or not, but
yeah, I think that like I mean, I think that so what do you think about like the claim, because I think Mearsheimer made this claim that like with respect to analyzing Putin's actions to try and figure out what his intentions are from that, it doesn't seem like there was that much evidence, although maybe he just like he had this intention and he was waiting for a politically opportune moment that gave him some sort of an excuse to carry through on those intentions. But I think Mearsheimer makes the point that we really don't have much evidence of Putin having any intention to invade Ukraine before like 2014, which was like the culmination of Western efforts to.
Sure, but I mean that's because Ukraine was like a highly corrupt state that had posed no threat to him whatsoever. The leadership that came into there prior to 2014 was incredibly loyal to Russian interests. I mean, yeah, why, like, as long as the state is like highly fucked, super corrupt, and has a leader that is, somebody that's willing to basically bend over for whatever Russian interests, like Putin is okay with that leader. What is the point you're making?
It's called compromise, Destiny. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm uncompromising on this position.
The point is, so the point is just like if Mearsheimer's argument is that the West could have taken alternative paths, right? Like if Mearsheimer's point is that absent the West increasingly westernizing through like the EU and through NATO and through, efforts to support like financially anti-Russian groups within Ukraine, absent the West doing all that, Russia arguably wouldn't have felt compelled to invade Ukraine. And if we would have taken some alternative path of action that ruled out Ukraine and Georgia's NATO membership and ensured neutrality and so on and created some sort of economic rescue plan, then we would have been able to strike a deal that Russia would be happy with, to the extent that they wouldn't then go in and invade Ukraine because they wouldn't feel that Ukraine is threatened to become westernized in that way. And so I guess that's just that's the point is and it seems like that narrative is sort of supported by the idea that it seems like Putin's taking of Crimea was a reaction to the not like it's not like explicitly supported like militarily or anything, but it nonetheless like rhetorically and arguably financially supported overthrow of the corrupt pro-Russian president in Ukraine.
Okay. Well, hey, listen, is there anything else you want, buddy?
Yeah, we don't have to go into a debate about this, but is it true? I've heard rumors that you're a duelist.
A little bit, maybe.
Okay.
Here, maybe you can solve this and get me off it real quick. Okay, ready?
Okay.
So here's my issue, okay? Do you think that conscious is a real thing? Consciousness, I should say.
It depends on what you mean by consciousness. Holy shit. I'm somewhat committed to the idea, or I'm somewhat attracted to the idea that basically qualia isn't a real thing.
Okay, hold on. Do you think that you're having a conscious experience?
Yeah.
Do you think that other people are having conscious experiences?
Yes.
Okay, here's the issue that I have. If we believe these things are things that exist or things that are real, but we can't analyze them, doesn't that make those things necessarily immaterial? Or how do we...
Not if you think that consciousness doesn't consist of anything more than objectively describable physical processes.
But does it? If
I
I
don't
were to
think so.
put down an increasingly complex series of circuitry in front of you and then have it communicate with you, would you ever at any point be able to observe a conscious experience?
No, but so do you know who
Nope.
do you know who Daniel Dennett is?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and he's, I guess, the more popular defender, although he's not like really a defender of the view. He's just kind of someone who holds it. The main defender is a guy named Keith Frankish, and they hold a view about called illusionism about consciousness. And the idea basically is that like the idea of like this sort of private mental show of first-person qualitative experience that we take consciousness to be, right? You know, like this idea of there are these qualitative properties, and those qualitative properties determine what it's like to experience a certain thing. And so there's like this what it's likeness that goes beyond the physically, objectively describable physical processes. And the argument from people like Keith Frankish and Daniel Dennett is that basically that qualia, the inherently first-person thing with all of the sort of problematic properties that are supposed to be associated with it, that dualists constantly bring up, those properties are basically illusory. They're like a sort of a user illusion that the brain creates in order to more successfully monitor certain processes.
Okay, how does that answer or address or deal with my question at all?
Well, because it seems like you take it that that qualia is a datum, right? And the illusionist view is that qualia isn't a datum that needs to be explained.
Why not?
It's our introspective reports that we have qualia.
Yeah, but that introspective report seems to be something unique or special from the rest of the world, no?
Well, the illusionist would just explain the introspective report by just telling a story about how our brains are this like overlapping series of processes and communication devices.
Yeah, but if I were to, but then returning to my other question then with this in mind, if I were to create an increasingly complex series of circuits, at some point would you say, oh, well, this overlap of things is creating like consciousness has emerged from this thing?
Yes.
How would you even know?
Well, I guess we would just form some sort of neuroscientific theory about what sorts of neurological phenomenon are associated with what we call consciousness.
Yeah, but I think we don't even have a good understanding. We're not even close to having a decent understanding of that, right? We still have weird shit about like split brain consciousness. I still don't think, or the fact that like brain structures are so much more malleable than we thought in the past. That if you injure parts of the brain, other parts of the brain will step in to take over roles and shit. I don't think we have a clear working understanding of what that even means yet. And not to say, I guess maybe in the future we could, but.
So I agree that. So, I mean, I agree that we don't have a good neurological theory of what consciousness consists of, like, totally. But that's kind of the point, right, is, and I think Sean Carroll makes this point as well, which is, like, and I feel weird, like, I'm citing all, like, the new atheist guys. I'm not really a new atheist. But, like, Sean Carroll makes this point where it's like, look, consciousness is one of the areas that we basically know least about, right? Like the subject of consciousness is incredibly shrouded in mystery. We don't really have good theories of it yet, biologically. But given that, right? But on the other hand, our theories of physics, at least with respect to us and our everyday experiences and our everyday environments, we understand the dynamics that go into that to an extremely precise degree, right? Like we have very well confirmed theories of like quantum field theory and particle physics that have never been contradicted by like any of our experiments, right? And it would seem like in order to posit this, realm of qualia that's beyond the physical that has some causal relationship with the physical world. That doesn't really fit with our best physical theories. And so the question is, sure, we don't have a good account of consciousness biologically yet, but when we have the best account, do we think it will break with all known laws of physics, or do we think that it will conform to those laws? And I think it's more safe to say that it'll probably conform to those laws.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Okay.
I guess so. I'll bet you $20.
Okay, I'll bet you $20.
Okay.
Okay. Have fun. Be careful. I love you. Oh, wait. I'm not unhinged, right?
Okay. You're not unhinged.
And NATO expansion probably isn't the primary drive to Russian neo-imperialism. Yeah?
I'm not sure. I think it's a drive. I think it's probably not the primary. I think like economic.
Not the primary. As long as it's not the primary. Okay. I'll settle for that one. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Love you, buddy. Be careful. I am not unhinged.